I'm going to be talking about how to stop team fracture. I am a lecturer at Stanford. I lecture in HCI. I wrote a book called Radical Focus, which some of you have read. And I'm a big OKR nerd. I'm a big team nerd. So fracture is a really interesting term that's been used by my colleagues Michael Bernstein and Mark Whiting to talk about the state in which a team is not totally broken, but they're damaged. So this is a picture of a stress fracture. It's not my leg, though I've had them. And it's not quite a break, but it's still painful and unpleasant and miserable. And one of the things about teams is that it's very expensive to have fracture. So this is an interesting study that I just tripped over recently by the Global Human Capital Report. And it says 2.8 hours a week spent dealing with conflict. And this is negative conflict, which is like 3 hours a week. And who needs that? We're already barely sleeping. And the one that really scared me was 9% led to product failure. Like, I don't know, it feels like being a startup is risky enough without that on top of it. So I talked about fracture. So what is a team? This is a definition from Wisdom of Teams. And it says it has a common purpose, performance goals, complementary skills, and mutual accountability. It's not just a work group. It's just not a bunch of people thrown together. But these are people who are going to get things done together. So the first stage is when we form a team. And forming a team can happen at any moment. It can happen at the beginning. Or every quarter I think of as a chance to do a redo. So everything I'm going to talk about today, I want you to think about, is there a good moment, for example, the end of Q3 and the beginning of Q4, that you can use to reboot your team as well? So during we form, we're going to set OKRs, we're going to set our responsibility, and we're going to set our norms. Okay, norms are incredibly important. Norms are the unspoken rules of interaction. It's how you think you should be behaving with other people. The problem with norms is that unspoken part. I have one idea how it's going to work. You have another idea how it's going to work. And people are very different. They all come from different backgrounds. They have different experiences. And so what we end up with is somebody who thinks it's incredibly rude to be 10 minutes late and somebody who thinks that 15 minutes late is completely acceptable because maybe they're from France, as my ex-husband was. Sorry. He was like, we can't show up for dinner on time because they'll still be in their underwear. And I'm like, oh, okay, so 6:30 actually means 7. So every culture has their own rules. You don't want to default into the norms, which is what we do now. I mean, if you think of how do we do a team now, we just shove everybody in a room and said, good luck with that. This is not what we want to do. So we're going to do a norms exercise. Let's start stuff right away. You're going to turn to somebody next to you if you want to get in little groups of 2 or 3. This isn't a super workshop-y room, but we can make it work. And what I want you to do is think of the best team you were ever part of. That team that you were like, oh my God, is there such a thing as group marriage? Because I'm marrying y'all right now, right? Okay, what made it so great? And I asked this question on Twitter, and there's a few answers if you need a little bit of things to get you thinking about it. But talk among yourselves. Just don't name names or anything, but what made that group so amazing? Okay, go. Okay, now for the good part, right? Were you just waiting for this one? I always have to start with the positive, because once you go dark, you can never go back. Okay, you got to think, what was the worst team, the coyote team? You'd rather chew off your leg than go into work with this team. Sorry, terrible joke, but I am also from the Midwest. What was the worst time, and what made it so bad? Like, for me, it's sort of like the all happy families are alike, but all unhappy families are horrible in their own special way. I think that's a Russian author, Tolstoy. Yeah, Tolstoy, yeah. Humanities major, what do you do with an English degree? I don't know. No. Product management. Okay, let's talk about the worst team you were ever on and what made it so bad, okay? Return to your group. Now you get therapy. 2 minutes of therapy. And I know you're really angry now, so we'll do, if you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. You can hear me, clap 3 times. I did this at Mind the Product. And if you know, it's like 8,000 people or something ridiculous. And it was like the best feeling of having this huge auditorium go. It was a high, a lot of power. Okay, so let's do something with this, right? Okay, norms exercise. You're in your groups, you're sharing. I want you to try to make rules. Imagine these people you're talking to are now your brand new teammates. What rule are you going to have for how you behave together? You know, you just complained bitterly about something, right? And I saw some pain in the room, right? What's the new rule that will keep that from happening, okay? So go back to your groups. I know this is a little trickier, and then we're going to share out, okay? So talk about what are the rules for your group. So we're going to do some share outs. Who's going to share a rule your team came up with? Be proud of your team. Brag about your team. What's something brilliant you came up with? You were done early, so you know I'm calling on you. Yep, in the back?
Ours is easy, kind of, because the three of us are either ex-Amazonians or Amazonian. So we have the leadership principles to fall back to. And so we just discussed what were our favorite leadership principles, and I think the three of us really liked have backbone, disagree, and commit, and have open disagreements with each other on our team, and then bias for action. We're going to move quickly, and that's how we're going to kind of norm ourselves.
Okay, so since you had a head start, let's talk about so the three of you are working together. You have a bias for action. That's one of the things I heard, right? What are you going to do when it's violated? Like this dude over the corner, he's like, what if we move slow and ship well instead of breaking things? Sorry. I'm such a hippie. So, you know, what are you going to say to this gentleman when he's like, whoa, let's slow down a bit?
I think you're being too tentative, you know, in general. Like it's a dial that you set between conservatism and being aggressive, and in general, like to turn the dial a couple clicks towards moving faster, and you know, you take some risk, but
yeah, I think being able to have that conversation. That a lot of people set these norms, but they don't really talk about what are we going to do when somebody's not adhering to them. What are we going to do when they're violated? And how will you enforce them? You know, we've all agreed this is who we want to be. What are we going to do when somebody's saying, wow, I don't feel good about this? Or, you know, we said we'd argue about this and we were going to make a decision, but I never felt good about that decision and it's really bothering me. So what are we going to do? Are we going to say, hey, this is our rules? Are we going to make space for that? What are we going to do as a team when that happens? Because it's never enough to set things. Let's take a look at yours.
Yeah, so we discussed making sure you have an open mind in conversations. Related to that is you need to listen honestly. So if someone is explaining their point of view, make sure that you're really taking it in and not just trying to get through that step so you can get through the decision-making process. And then similarly on some teams that disagree and connect.
Yeah, so
you can close it off.
So can you pick one of those?
So we'll say listen honestly.
Listen honestly. Well, what does it look like when I'm not listening honestly?
You're on the phone, you're distracted. You're showing body language that says that you're not really feeling it, and then not speaking up and giving your opinion on why you may disagree with that.
And do you ladies agree with that? Does that sound about right? Anything you want to add? So first of all, we have to figure out what does it look like? Because a lot of people do these things like where they say, hey, biased action, but what does that actually look like? And what does it look like when we don't do it? And let's say you're talking and she's like, you know, what are you going to say? How are you going to, she's not listening honestly, or is she listening honestly and just not really digging it? What's going on there? So that's a conversation you're going to want to have with people, which is when we violate these norms, when we are looking unhappy, is it safe for you to say to her, wow, you look like is there something about what I'm saying that's difficult for you? I'd love to know, you know. But giving yourselves permission about how you're going to behave together, it's more than just setting some principles. How about over here? Anybody have something to work with? I know you do.
We went super tactical, actually, and we were talking, we took a very product perspective of it, which is before, from a product perspective, agree on the principles of what it is that we're trying to achieve before we get into detail. So make sure, and it's an indirect way of saying build trust from the beginning, so we can empower people to go off on their own to agree on principles.
Yeah, well, I'm obviously a big fan of setting your goals and letting people figure out how to get there, since that's the OKR way. So that's another situation where you have to figure out what does it look like when we don't do that, and what are we going to do about it. So I'm just trying to build up this remembrance that it's not just set and forget. And that really speaks back to OKRs, what makes them work as well. And we'll talk about that a little more. But it's really, really important to set these norms, talk about what it looks like when people aren't doing it and when they are doing it, and when we're going to talk about it. So this is Erin Meyer's culture map. There's multiple books called The Culture Map. This is my favorite one. It's written by a professor at NSAD in France. And she talks about the ways people in different countries vary on 8 key factors. So what we just did is we did sort of a bottoms-up creation of norms, right? Whatever bugs you personally, we talked about. This is more of a tops-down approach to setting norms, because this way, if we've forgotten one of these key elements, we can actually talk about it. So one of the most confusing ones, so I'll hit this one a little bit, is high context and low context. So high context means we're very homogenous. We know what we're talking about a lot. And low context is just you say it very bluntly. For example, Dan asked me to speak, and I was like, well, I'm kind of busy right now. And he's like, Christina, you'll have such a great time. And that was my high context way of going, I really don't have time for this. But Dan is very low context, so he's like, unless she says no, she means yes. And now that I'm here, I'm so happy I did it, so don't tell Dan, he's right. But this is the problem we get, is like, we have all these varieties of the way we say things, and we have to learn how to listen to each other. Low context is actually the most effective way to communicate in a multicultural team, for the simple reason of you're less likely to be misunderstood, right? So if you are working with folks, sometimes you have to say, are you coming or not? What I found interesting is it's not just about country cultures. So when I first worked at Yahoo, they were super, let's just say kind of passive aggressive. Like every employee survey was, what do you like best about Yahoo? It was my fellow employees. And this is way back in 2000, 2001, so back in the day. And it was so nice. And if you wanted to get something done, you met with everybody. I swear, it felt like everybody in the company. You'd go from person to person to person, get everybody on board, and then you would launch something. When I started working at Zynga, they were just aggressive. They were in your face. It was like, okay, what do you got? Okay, if you place an ad here, I'll place an ad there. Otherwise, you can just screw off. You know, it's like, oh, I wasn't ready for that. So companies have cultures just like countries have cultures. And you have to kind of learn to speak the language of the culture. And we're always experiencing what I think of as sort of shearing layers, cognitive dissonance that comes from the fact that you are moving from culture to culture to culture, which I thought, I'm going to mispronounce your name, but Tatiana, she really hit it. That's the thing, is like, you know, your team may be like this, your department may be like this, your corporate may be like this, your family. Like, I know Italian families where everybody shouts on top of each other. In my family, you know, you wait till somebody's finished, and they say, well, I've been thinking about it a little bit different way. Regions, countries, Iowans were very nice and very stubborn. And then even your own nature can be against it. Like, believe it or not, I'm an introvert, and being in Zynga was a lot of work for me. So we're always having these tensions between these other cultures, and that's why we have to sit down and make our norms. So this is it is an I wish, and so this would be a great exercise to do possibly with your team when you get back, as well as doing the bad team, good team, what do we want to be. We can go through each one, and I put in numbers to make it a little easier, but this is where we are, and this is where I think we'd like to be. So leading is one, and if you don't mind, if you have a place to take some notes, I believe they were handing out moleskins. Think of your team back home. Okay, is it egalitarian leading? Does everybody sort of lead together? Or is there a clear person who actually leads? And then deciding, which is either top-down or consensual. So what's interesting about this is you might think these are exactly alike, but the reality is that in Japan, it's actually very egalitarian and it's consensual decision-making. In China, it's very hierarchical and very top-down. In America, we're almost always leading is egalitarian, but deciding is actually top-down. So think of it as a bunch of you guys get together, you're all talking back and forth, you're arguing, and then the CEO goes, okay, I've heard enough, we're doing that. That's your classic egalitarian leadership with a top-down deciding. Does everybody understand those concepts? Okay, so think about where you are and where you'd like to be. Negative feedback. We talked about the shit sandwich. You know, a good thing, a bad thing, a good thing. But that varies a lot, actually. So some people are like that. That's a very typical American thing that you have to like tell them 20 nice things before you can say, and by the way, this one thing is on my nerves. But what you can do is, like, I don't know if you've worked with an Israeli or a Dutch person. Okay, say no more. They're like, yeah, that code is crap. Yeah, that's very direct negative feedback, right? It's a very different planet. And then disagreeing, are we confrontational or non-confrontational? Are we more like Yahoo or are we more like Zynga? And what would we like? Maybe we're so nice to each other, we're not actually ever getting anything to move forward, right? Communicating, high context, low context. In other words, you kind of hint or you just come out with it. And persuading, this is really fascinating to me. So one is concept theory first versus practice. So should I open up with an example? Or should I give you the theory first so you can place the example inside of the theory? So this is, again, you're going to see engineers. Sometimes they're very concept first, and sometimes they're very application first. I think about working with engineers. There's the people who are like, if you don't understand, explain to me why this is the best approach to the code. I'm not even going to talk to you. Or there's one like, well, it works. Okay, why does it work? So that's a bit of a difference, too. Trusting. Americans are very task-based, like I hired you to do this job, I'm never gonna have a beer with you, let's keep business business, versus, say, a lot of South America, where you need to become friends first, you need to have conversations. I live part-time in Belize, and you better believe that you better be asking about the kids, asking about the family, remembering when they were sick, checking in to make sure they're okay, and then eventually you can talk about the state of your construction projects. And the last one, this one cracks me up. So scheduling, linear time versus flexible time. That's the whole, are you showing up on time or are you showing up sort of vaguely in the area of the on-timeness? I did this workshop, a one-day workshop with a team, and they spent 20 minutes talking about what time a meeting should start, and I realized I had to cut them off because they were gonna continue to, it's like, but you have to get across campus, but it's rude, but what if we did this? What if, I was like, it's either the meeting that starts at 11 or 11:10, pick one. But this is a really big thing, and I've seen people get upset, like bitterly, angrily upset, because somebody is always 15 minutes late to their meeting. And they're like, this is an asshole, they don't care about me, they disregard, there's no respect. And the reality is they're like, what? This is what everybody does. My last company, we all started meetings 15 minutes late, or 10 minutes late, and I'm just 5 minutes late. So one of them things. So I'd like you to get back to your groups again, and then talk about what really popped out as something you'd like to change, and maybe give each other some advice about how that change could happen, okay? If you want to talk to someone new, that's between you and your seating arrangement. I'm a big fan of Amy Edmondson's work. This is from Teaming, although I will say her new book, The Fearless Organization, just is a universe exponentially more awesome, which makes it one of the most awesome books you should read. But I think this really sums it up, is the problem is that we think our framing is everybody's framing. And Dan and I argue all the time because he loves Myers-Briggs. And I'm like, oh my God, that was invented by a lady who misread Jung and wanted to use it to understand her daughter. And then I realized I'd heard all these stories, right, about people who use Myers-Briggs, and I realized it was doing a job. Okay, it's not scientific. You could use horoscopes instead, but the job it did, I really don't like Myers-Briggs, I'm sorry. Big Five, Ocean, that's the one that actually has science. Okay, but what it did do, which was amazing, is it made people realize not everybody is like you. And I know that sounds like something really obvious, but when you talk to someone and say, wow, when you're 10 minutes late, I feel like you're telling me your time's more important than my time. And I'm like, what? I never thought about it that way. So anything that gets you to talk about the fact that we're different from each other will create more empathy, will create better connections, although I'd like to recommend not so much the Myers-Briggs. But other than that. So from here, you've got your two things, right? You've got your bottom up, you've got your top down, you've discovered a lot of things about how you want to be. You're going to build a little team charter or norms or rules, whatever you want to call it, and you're going to revisit them weekly. And I'm going to talk a lot about cadence as we go on. I would love you to go home and do this with your team as soon as possible. there's this magical moment that happens at the end of a quarter and the beginning of a new quarter, and I call it the do-over. So you can close your quarter. If you're doing OKRs, you can grade your OKRs, and you can say, as we enter the new quarter, let's sit down and say, how have we been doing as a team? How would we like to be? Having those quarter revisits as well helps with new people. So I don't know if you've heard of the infamous philosophical thought experiment, Ulysses' ship, which is if every single piece of the ship that Ulysses took on his Odyssey has been replaced, when he gets home, is it the same ship? And that's what we see with teams, right? We start out with a group, somebody quits, somebody gets promoted, and then all these things that you had assumed that you'd done with that original team, it's all new people. So revisiting your norms quarterly allows you to make sure that you're continuing to have a team that has cohesion. So is there any reason you can't do this? This could be the world's fastest slide, which would be great. Think you could take your team through some of this? And by the way, it is very therapeutic. Complaining bitterly about things that have gone wrong in the past. Just make sure that you ask them about past teams, unless you have psychological safety. If you have psychological safety, you can talk about what we are doing poorly. And that often helps too, is if you say we're doing this together, it's a lot better than you are an asshole. That doesn't fly very well. Yes?
What do you find when you have teams that are discussing?
I started off, first I time box it. So I'll be like, we're gonna just do this. It's gonna take 15 minutes. It's gonna make everything better, okay? I mean, I just took you through like the world's fastest version of this. It's kind of ridiculous. And I'll say, think of this horrible team that you were part of. And people are like into it. People like to talk about their traumatic past experiences, believe it or not. And it creates a little, what do they call it, trench buddy emotions. What was a good team, what was a bad team, how would we like to be? And if they're being very tentative and they only come up with 3 rules, let them have only 3 rules. Like, at least they got them out. Because as you do a weekly retrospective, you can start adding to that collection. The important thing is like to do it once. Maybe 15 minutes is too long. You can do it in 10. I just did it in 10. I had to interrupt you a lot, and it's kind of sad because I know that you are all more interesting to each other than I am. But I would say if they're tentative, just say, humor me. We're going to do a mini version of it. If we like it, we'll go back next quarter. I have nobody who said, oh, hell no, to me yet, but maybe I'm just imposing. I have no idea.
Do you like the science behind Enneagram?
No.
What is Big 5 Ocean that you like?
Look up Big 5 personality test or Ocean. Ocean is a mnemonic for it. It's openness, conscientiousness, extroversion. You'll notice they're very similar, but Big 5 is the one that is currently the strongest in the personality literature. I like to read peer review papers for fun. Everybody's got something weird they like. Especially psychology papers are a blast, as you know. Good times. Yeah, so Big 5 has been the one that's the most stable. So mutual accountability is a really hard one. And this is why I kept hitting you folks with this, about the questions about how will you know, how will you talk to somebody, how are you going to ask them about this. In a work group, and a lot of you who've been product managers or are people managers, you're used to it. The engineer comes to you, go, that designer never gets me anything on time. And then the designer's like, that engineer is always rushing me, and that product manager doesn't understand what it takes to make good design, and they're all coming to the person in the center. If instead you can get your team to the place where the engineer says to the designer, hey, is it ready yet? And they're like, I'm still working on it, and the engineer can actually say, if you don't get to me by Friday, we're going to miss our launch window. That's what you want. You want to sort of be moving towards holding each other accountable as opposed to having to go to the leader to do it. And this is the infamous developmental sequence in small groups. So I talked about forming. First we put people together, then they fight a lot, then theoretically they agree on norms. They tend to be emergent rather than explicit. I'm always like, how can I make storming shorter? And the answer was making norms explicit gets you out of storming much faster. Performing means you're awesome, and then adjourning. Well, I have never seen a linear process that I don't hate. I am into cycles. So I started looking at this going, well, what is this really like? You enter through the form, and then you storm, norm, perform, and I'm a lean startup girl, so I'm into the build, measure, learn. What if storm, norm, and perform were like build, measure, learn? What if we were constantly saying, okay, we set this, but let's check them, right? We set our norms, we set our OKRs, let's check them, and let's have a formal period at the end of the quarter to actually evaluate them and make sure they're working. Instead of just saying, we're done now, we're perfect. Because the problem is that when you start norming, bad habits start becoming codified. So you need to constantly have that time to say, gosh, we've gotten into the habit of shipping late. We've gotten into the habit of always going to Joe with our problems. How are we going to fix this? So thinking of it as a cycle is the big thing that makes everything work. So this is the cadence. Goals, roles, and norms. Form once, or theoretically. Perform weekly. Adjourn quarterly. This is what makes OKRs work. This is what makes norms work. This is what makes everything work. So when we set them, we want to do a combination of bottom-up suggestions and top-down decisions. It's usually the most efficient. People are more likely to buy in. Who does not know what an OKR is? Anybody want a quick one? You could just wink at me, because I know it's very embarrassing to raise your hand. Okay, we're good with objectives and key results-ish. They cover the common purpose and performance goal. There's a bunch of books on it. The yellow one is really good. I totally recommend it. It's the shortest one, people. That's the big win there. The O is a qualitative goal. The KR is a success criteria. Setting goals is really important, and everybody's always like, why are OKRs better than SMART goals? Why are they better than KPIs? Well, the reason they're better than KPIs, I think of an OKR as a KPI with a soul because of that qualitative goal, right? We want to enter France successfully, making the French people love our product, whatever, right? Like love, passion, things like that. Well, how do we know they love it? They're adopting it at a certain rate. We're making a certain amount of revenue. But what you see is salespeople, often CEOs, business people, they love those metrics, but your designers, your customer service, some parts of marketing, some engineers, the number is like, 5 million, 500, 5,000, whatever. You want that emotional quality in your goals to get people inspired. They should be willing to leap out of bed and go, yeah, I'm fixing the world today. And it's going to give me $5 million while we're at it. Hey, yay. So this is a possible example from the book. Clear value to distributors as quality tea provider. It's got those juicy adjectives. And then here's how we know. How do we know we were successful? Rewarders at 85%, 20% of self-serve, revenue of $250K. So I'm going to let you guys try writing one either for your current company, but I am going to ask you to share this. So if you feel like you can't do something for your current company, how about for yourself? Q4, how about stay healthy during the season of candy and cake in the office? Well, how would I know? I didn't gain any weight. Hey, I continued to jog. You can see how that works. So why don't we just take a couple minutes for you to set something, either personally, if you don't want to share a company thing, or for your company, and then we'll do a little check-in with each other. We're going to coach each other. You are all now each other's coaches. So share your OKR with one person or three, however you want. When you hear the objective, is it aspirational and qualitative? In other words, you're like, wow, how awesome would it be if you did that? And then the KR, is it a result or a task? If there's one mistake people make over and over again is, say I'm like worried about my health, maybe I might make a KR which is run every week. That's not a result, that's a task. But if it's not lose weight and it's starting to get rainy and running's not working for me, I can switch it out with swimming, I can switch it out with push-ups. You want to stay flexible in the result you're seeking for, because as things change, you need that nimbleness. So you want to avoid putting tasks in the KR. And then, is it actually measurable? I was doing a workshop with a bunch of execs, and they were like, we want to have great meetings. Let's measure it by attendance. And I just looked at them and like, you're going to take attendance at meetings? Really? 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 And they're like, no, really not. So, they ended up with irregular reward schedule style Q&A, blah, 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 but they did find a way to do it. So is it something you can actually measure? And you wouldn't believe how many companies I work with that are actually measuring nothing. And just the idea of measuring things is all, yeah, yay. And then if you're doing quarterly OKRs, Do you think it takes a full quarter to achieve? Do you have 50% confidence? There is a very readable short book about it, so we won't cover it too much. Sorry, I'm a terrible human. Okay, check in with each other's OKRs right quick. The last piece of the puzzle is, of course, the role, and we always want to have complementary skills. I think all y'all know this, so I don't have to go into it too much. And we want to set our expertise roles. So the big idea here is, why do we do it once? Like, what do? We just go online and we go, oh, this job description looks sort of like what I can use. I'll change a couple things and I'm just going to put it up. And then I hire people and I'm talking to them and they're like, yeah, they seem okay. Okay, let's hire them. And then they turn out bad. Instead, I recommend, and this is something I've been working on with my clients, this is new stuff, is one quadrant is how will they fulfill or help you fulfill your OKRs, So those are goals. Responsibility. What is the business as usual stuff they have to do? Performance reviews, yay, or filling out tax forms. What skills and knowledge do you think they have? And then once you filled that out, you can put in questions in the interview section. And I'm going to hope that you all know the right way to ask an interview question, which is, tell me about a time when your deadline suddenly got moved up 2 weeks, or tell me about a time when. And when you're looking at that, you can actually say, hey, I want to make sure I have a question for that. I want a question for that. I want a question for that. That's why I put it on the same piece of paper. Okay. Here's the big one. In a team, there are informal roles as well. Facilitator, tiebreaker, spokesperson, schedule keeper, office housework. You know what happens if we do not set these roles? The tall white guy makes all the decisions, and guess who gets the coffee? Don't do this. It creates anger, resentment, company documents sent to TechCrunch, all sorts of anger comes out of this. You don't want that. Also, it's really good to rotate these, So you could say, okay, in this meeting, you're going to be the one who facilitates and keeps us from fighting. Oh, now it's going to be you. You can rotate these jobs around if there's jobs people really don't like doing. And you should rotate them anyway, because nobody likes doing them. It's like scrubbing out the bathtub. It's not a good time for anyone. Okay. So the big idea here, and I was just talking to this gentleman about it, is really about living it. OKRs are not the best because they're the best way to set it. SMART probably is a better way to set it, but it's a lot of work, so I like OKRs. But it's because you live it. Every single week you say, what are you going to do to make this happen? And something I found really interesting is I have a group with 2 other women where we do personal OKRs. We've been doing this for about 2 years. One of them is a total David Allen getting things done girl. She's like, I had this finished at 78%, and I'm like, I either did it or I didn't. And our other friend's like, I don't know. I've been meaning to set OKRs. But okay, I'm going to do this one thing this week. Well, guess what? She went from a failed product manager to getting trained as a coach to actually building a huge client base. And even though she never did the formal OKR setting, that weekly rhythm of saying, hey, you want something? Have you made any progress? That all by itself worked. Sort of like what I said about Myers-Briggs. It may not be the best, but there's something about its heart that really works. So checking in every week in your OKRs, do we still think we're going to make them? What are you doing towards them? With roles, it's feedback. It's that one-on-one. And one of the things I've learned from teaching is if I give my students 20 pieces of feedback, they don't do any of it. And if I give them 3 pieces of feedback, they do all 3. So because you're meeting every week, you don't have to tell somebody everything that's wrong with them. You can just suggest one little thing to work on. So you can build the feedback, and then you can adjust the norms with the weekly retrospective. There are 2 kinds of feedback, individual and team. With team feedback, love, 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 love. Retrospectives do not skip the retrospective. Take 10 minutes and just say, what experiment do we want to run next week as a team? Do we want to try rotating the roles? Do we want to try having a talking stick? Like, whatever, right? They make a difference. And it really takes 5 minutes. So the last thing I want to talk about is there was this woman, when I first started at Zynga, everybody told me, you're going to have to fire her. They're like, yeah, she's going to have to go. Yeah, Christina, you're going to have to fire her. And first of all, I was like, why didn't you fire her before I got here? Were you saving this like a present for me? Yay. And so I went around and I talked to everybody. I did my 360, and then I sat her down formally, and I said, hey, here's everything that is an issue in your performance. And she started crying. And I'm like, fuck, it's going to be one of those meetings. And she turns to me and she says, thank you. I'm like, okay. I thought everybody just hated me because I went to Stanford and I had a fancy degree. She's like, I can fix this. Like, you just gave me a bunch of things I can fix. Maybe people will talk to me again. And she ended up fixing everything, doing an amazing job, and I promoted her 6 months later. We have to give feedback because it's unfair. And the classic corporate feedback, you wait till the end of the year, you gather, you present people, they're really depressed. When I was at Yahoo, after performance reviews, we couldn't do anything for like a month because everybody was pissed off. These are not working, right? We want them to be shorter cycles. So you want to reduce the quantity of information. Remember, I said, tell somebody 3 things, they'll do it. Tell them 20 things, they just block out. Reduce the gap between the action and the evaluation. Quarterly conversations, even if you can't do quarterly performance reviews, which is the very best in my opinion, quarterly conversations. And then when you do the annual performance review, nobody's surprised, and you have documentation of what's actually going on, as opposed to saying, how did they do in November? I like them fine. And iterative. If you do a quarterly conversation, people can get better. And you can say you're getting better or you're not getting better. Like, seriously, folks, we should all be doing this. Use the role canvas for your one-on-ones. Oh, yeah, I did actually ask them to do this. Perhaps I ought to be making sure they're doing it. Hey, are they spending time growing themselves? Am I spending time making sure they're growing? And then you look through this and you write down the feedback you want to give and you talk to them. Very straightforward. The feedback loop, observe, ask yourself, when I see something, like somebody always coming late, is it because they're an asshole or is it because they're from Belize? Is it cultural? Contextualize it and then communicate it. And you want to communicate it in a way that says, if this continues on, I cannot continue to work with you. When you interrupt me in the meeting, I lose my train of thought, I get upset, and I feel like I can't work with you anymore. How can we stop this pattern? How can we work together to change this pattern? It's like it's a Mad Lib, it's simple, but it'll remind you to talk about what is the behavior you see. We're not going to talk about whether they're a jerk or not. We're just going to talk about the behavior. We're going to talk about how it affects people. And we're going to talk about the consequences of that behavior. And then we're going to work together to fix it. Or we're going to fire them. So I'm going to fly through this just because I'm going to say this is pretty good, but what's even better is to roll your own. You know your norms. At the end of the quarter, simply say, are we living it? Are we not living it? What do we want to do? Very simple stuff. There was a guy I worked with at MySpace, and when I first started MySpace, they all said, you can't fire him. He knows where the bodies are buried. He has all the relationships. He's the only one who understands that code. So I fired him. And everything got better. He was a jerk. He was an asshole. He was insulting people. He made people not willing to work. And if you just have the courage to fire the people who refuse to grow, who refuse to change, it's better for the team. It's miserable briefly, but it's better for the team. So a real quick recap, set your goals, roles, and norms. Check weekly to make sure you're living your intention. Take time, formal reflection at the end. And treat quarters as do-over moments. Isn't that awesome? You have 4 times a year where you can make everything better. And of course, do it from a position of loving kindness. And there's a QR code where you can say, Christina tried to put 5 hours of material into a 55-minute slot. Bring her back. Thank you. Oh, and look, I don't have a cover, but there's a book coming. There's an Amazon pre-order page up. Woo! I'm so happy.